Hello everyone, this is part 28 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Is there any discomfort? Fuu's voice had a surprising hint of tenderness as she slowly unwrapped the bandages from around Haku's hands. It had been a daily thing for them for the past week as she had to constantly reapply light healing salve to aid the restoration of the Hyoten wielder's tenketsu. To his credit though, the dark-haired Yuki didn't even flinch as the last of the clean, white bandages fell from around his fingers. He looked down, expecting to see what he had for the past few days, ugly discoloration and the dark, angry red spots that represented the areas he had nearly blown out his delicate chakra points. It feels okay. And he meant it. After waking up the first day, it had taken a good deal of his self-control not to whimper in pain at the intense burning sensation beneath the skin of his hands. Holding anything had been difficult, and moving his fingers, let alone forming hand seals, had been nearly impossible. Even now he could feel the faint throb that was an ever-present reminder of the damage he had done to himself in their battle with Han. However, compared to that initial burning, it was barely noticeable. Sure enough, when he looked down, the angry red marks had faded and his hands now only bore a faint, unnatural pink hue. In any case, it will take a few more days to fully heal. Haku nodded absently as he experimentally flexed his hands, marveling at how easy it was compared to yesterday. He was still slightly stiff, but that was to be expected after so long without using them. It didn't make it any less uncomfortable though. Thank you, Fu. The girl only nodded in her reserved, quiet way as she stood back up, walking across the clearing to tend to her other patient. Haku watched her go with a small smile. This last week Fu had really showcased her abilities with medical ninjutsu as she cared for both him and Naruto. However, it had also revealed another side of her. He had a feeling the girl enjoyed taking care of them, being the one in charge for once. It didn't matter that Naruto was more powerful than her. What mattered was the fact that right now, in his weakened condition, he was completely reliant on her care. However, it was obvious that was coming to an end. With every day, Naruto's remarkable healing abilities fixed his wrecked chakra system. Even now, the pallid sheen on his skin had vanished and it no longer pained. Recently he had even garnered the ability to walk again without wincing every step. It had only sped up once he had been able to channel chakra to some extent again and was able to use his own impressive skill with medical ninjutsu to aid his recovery. It made Haku long for when they began to teach him in earnest. He wished to heal people like they could. How are you feeling? Fu blinked in surprise when a moment passed and Naruto didn't answer. He was sat against a tree, staring off into the forest with a far-off expression. She sat down next to him curiously, knowing that he wasn't meditating as he took a specific position for that. Naruto. The young monk blinked suddenly as he looked around, as if he genuinely hadn't noticed Fu's approach. She understood it must be quite disconcerting for him to be so injured. He was probably so used to his extended range of vision through the water in the air that going without it made him feel blind. Oh, sorry, I was thinking about something. Fu smiled lightly. It had been amazing how much the two of them had spoken over the past week. It wasn't about anything in particular, but with little else to do as the two boys recovered, talking was the only thing they could do. She felt oddly light and airy as she had allowed herself to talk about anything that came to mind, from her observations from their travels to private little thoughts she had never shared with anyone before. At the same time, she had been allowed a glimpse into just what was going through Naruto's mind, and it somehow only made her more enraptured with the enigma that was the blonde monk. A Ryo for your thoughts. Naruto gave a small smile of his own at that as he allowed his head to roll back and rest against the tree. I've just been thinking of how long it's been since I was home. He sighed and looked off in a seemingly random direction. However, Fu knew better. These were the woods Naruto had grown up surrounded by, and out of the group he knew them best. That was mostly likely the direction of the fire temple. It's so close now. He let out a small chuckle and returned to staring up through the canopy of the forest to the blue sky high above them. How long has it actually been? Fu was a little surprised she had never asked before. It had just never come up in conversation. All she knew was that Shizuku had been traveling with him for longer than her and before that he had briefly traveled alone. Naruto looked down in thought. There had been the months in Suna, the time traveling through the smaller countries where he met Shizuku and Fu, the months they spent in Kumogakur, their time in Mizu no Kuni aiding the resistance and the year spent traveling with Tsunade. He was 13 now, nearing his 14th birthday. He had left when he was only 11. Around 2.5 years. Fu actually widened her eyes in surprise. While it was true she had never really had a place she could definitively call her home, at least in the sentimental sense of the word, but she at least had an approximation of the feeling traveling with Naruto. To be apart from that for such a time was a hard concept for her to think about. That must be difficult. Naruto nodded slowly, his expression becoming distant again. Why not go back? One of his eyebrows rose in surprise as Fu blinked at her own statement. She wasn't sure why she had said that. She wasn't entirely sure what would happen if Naruto returned to the Fire Temple. Would he stay? Would Fu be allowed to stay with him? Once again she realized how little she actually knew of Naruto's life before he set out on his pilgrimage. After all, it was what came after he started that was more important to her. I don't even know. I suppose there's nothing saying monks can't return before their journey is over. He sighed lightly as he fell forward, resting his arms on his knees to look at the ground. It's just, I don't feel like I've accomplished what I set out to do. How can I go back knowing that? Fu sat in silence with him for a while, only the gentle ambient noises of the forest breaking up the stillness. Even Haku didn't make a sound. He was spending his time how he always had during the past week, reading medical scrolls that Naruto and Fu still had left over from their training with Tsunade. What was it you wanted to do? Naruto finally looked up and simply stared at Fu for a moment, his rippled eyes meeting her orange ones. I wanted to understand chakra. Fu said nothing to that, just silently absorbing it as she most often did. However, internally it had her greatly surprised. Chakra was everything in the shinobi world. It made up their lives, their professions, their amazing abilities. Yet how many of them had stopped to really think about what it was exactly that drove their impressive jutsu? Sure, they knew it was the combination of physical and spiritual energies, but there were few that didn't know just remedial information. To actually undertake the task of coming to understand such a mysterious and barely understood energy was daunting to anyone, never mind a young child only just venturing out into the world. What makes you think you haven't made progress? This was the first Fu had heard of Naruto's goal, his true goal that had driven him into the wide world in the first place. The blonde looked up, genuinely curious about what his friend meant. What do you mean? Fu smiled, catching Naruto slightly off guard with the warm expression. It was true she had opened up more in the past week, however it was rare to see her simply smile, seemingly for no reason. She leaned forward, taking Naruto's hands lightly in her own and turned him over so his palms faced up. You have mastered all 5 of the elemental natures, who else can say that? Naruto shrugged lamely. That was simply learning to do something with his chakra, not inherently understanding it, although he had come to realize that chakra could behave in any way that his will could bend it to. You created a technique that can bend light using chakra as a medium. A frown appeared on the boy's face at that. It had been a long period of trial and error to discover that chakra had that property, but in the end he supposed he had learned something about it. I don't see. Fu surprised Naruto again by placing a finger on his lips, see him off as her look became intense. Normally he was the one capturing people with his powerful gaze, however right now he couldn't tear his own away from those deep, vibrant orange orbs. You are able to create anything from nothing simply with your chakra. That alone is something nobody else in the world can say. She couldn't strictly know that to be true, but at least from what the Kyuubi had told him he knew that it was an ability exclusive to the Sage of the 6 Paths, and subsequently Rinnegan uses. A smile crossed Naruto's face as he pushed off the ground, standing up to his full height, feeling a little better about himself. Thanks, Fu. Her own smile brightened at that. Naruto wasn't exactly loath to hand out compliments or thanks, but it made him no less special for her to hear. She would be the first to admit that she craved acceptance and attention after her treatment in Takagakure, but even then there was just something special about the attention Naruto gave her, something difficult for the emotionally stunted Jinchuriki to explain, even to herself. It's no problem. The blonde just let out a small chuckle before surprising her, moving in close and wrapping his arms around her smaller body in a warm, comforting embrace. No really, I'll always be happy when you're there to pick me up out of my lowest times. The mint-haired girl had no answer for that as a blush crept along her face that she was valiantly, but fruitlessly fighting against. Luckily for her, when Naruto finally let go of her, he seemed distracted and she was able to turn away and hide the pink staining her cheeks. We should probably start to get ready to move. Fu finally managed to get a handle on her on expression in time to look up in confusion. The group had recovered but they were still weak. Where are we going? Naruto just turned and gave her a dazzling smile, somehow made even more radiant by the slight glow to his eyes. I feel homesick and there are some people I really want you to meet. Naruto couldn't properly express the feelings that welled up inside him as the wayward trio crested a hill only to finally spot the high walls of the fire temple through the trees. The familiar steel gates with their imposing and intricate designs standing strong against the greens and browns of the forestry. Fu walked by his side, a soft but still shrewd expression on her face as her friend's home finally came into view. Haku trailed slightly behind them. He hadn't been a part of the group for very long and for some reason he felt slightly out of place being brought here, as if he hadn't earned it yet. As they drew closer, the two gates did the job, humbling he weary travelers with the enormous statues of Tengu and Yamabushi, their faces covered by intimidating Oni masks. Naruto remembered when Chiriku had first explained the normally rather intimidating statues to a much younger, more curious Naruto. They were some of the very first practitioners of ninjutsu, or what would come to be called ninjutsu. It had been them that had set up the fire temple in the first place to hone their art while at the same time inviting anybody to come and learn with them, a policy the temple maintained to this day. The young monk didn't have to lay a single hand on the impeccable polished ornate door that belied its sturdiness. Nothing short of the most powerful shinobi could ever hope to breach the sealing jutsu on that auspicious gate. It simply swung open almost silently, only the heavily muffled noises of the equally large mechanisms designed to operate the gates reverberating through the surrounding walls. However, the monk that poked his head around the edge had no such reservations regarding the noise he made. Naruto. Naruto grinned. It seemed even under his shugegasa his wild blonde hair was easily recognizable to the people that had practically been his surrogate family for 4 years. Although he had to wonder what the chance was that this particular monk had been on gate duty on this very day. Hi Sora. It's been. Naruto's rippled eyes widened slightly as he was forced to bend his body at a rather unnatural angle to move out the way of a flying fist, courtesy of his oldest friend. He was more prepared for the follow-up as a tendril of sand easily broke through the ground, acting as a barrier that Sora sunk his fist into. The darker-haired monk's eyes widened in surprise at the new ability Naruto showed before a very familiar and challenging smirk appeared on his face. It seems you grew even stronger in your time away, Naruto. Quote. Impressively fast, Sora pulled his hand out of the tightening sand, confusing Naruto as to how until he saw the thin and razor-sharp coating of wind chakra around the boy's fist. But so did I. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this. However, before he could even move another step, the cold touch of a steel kunai found its way to his tea, making him involuntarily gulp as he looked around to see the previously ignored green-haired girl that had been standing by Naruto's side. He hadn't even seen her move. Ah hey, you made some new friends too, huh? He smiled weakly as Fuu's cold gaze drilled into him. It was as if she were looking past him entirely, as if his existence were no harder to snuff out than it was for her to breathe. Fu, it's alright. Sora's just a little hot-headed. Just like that it was gone, the kunai, the gaze, Fu herself. However, this time the dark-haired monk was paying attention and managed to spot the Jinchuriki flicker back to Naruto's side. Finally allowed to breathe without the fear of open his own tea, Sora managed to a large grin on his face as he looked across at his wayward friend. It really has been a while, Naruto. We might as well go in now. I'm pretty sure Chiriku-senpai will come to check out the chakra we were throwing around. The blonde nodded with his own smile splitting his face. He might have been surprised by the unexpected welcome from Sora, but that was just Sora. He trio followed the other monk inside the gates, watching as the enormous doors swung close with a resounding and oddly comforting clang. They turned their attention to the temple itself and Haku and Fu had to say they were impressed. However, to Naruto it was a whole different story. A multitude of warm feelings filled him as the nostalgia took hold. In reality, he supposed that 2 years really wasn't all that long in the grand scheme of things, but to finally be back gave him a sense of deep relief. Ah, Naruto, I had wondered when you would return to us. If anything, Naruto's smile managed to grow even larger as he turned to the familiar, elderly voice that had appeared behind them. Chukaku Shushu. The elderly head monk chuckled warmly as one of his favorite young students wrapped his arms around him in a quick embrace. He actually managed to raise a furry eyebrow at the fact Naruto was starting to encroach on him height-wise. You've gotten a lot taller, my boy. Naruto simply grinned at the sort of compliment as Chukaku made a general sweeping motion to the main building of the temple where his study was. Come now, I'm sure you have a great many stories to tell us about your travels, so we'll all go inside and have some tea. The man smiled warmly at the two young teens accompanying Naruto in the squinting manner that had them realize where Naruto had gotten his patented look from. I'm sure your friends will be most comfortable with the Fire Temple's hospitality. A mischievous glint entered the man's narrowed eyes that anybody in the temple would have been able to recognize. I made the tea myself, you know. For some reason his gaze was firmly on Fu when he said that. Naruto just sighed, wondering why all of the people he felt he could respect in this world just happened to be closet perverts, not that he could get any evidence on his wily Shushu. Come now, the tea's cooling. Sora, how did you guys meet Naruto? Sora walked between Haku and Fu as he guided him about the temple. Chukaku and Naruto were discussing something in private and the elderly head monk had suggested taking the two on a tour. Sora was a little annoyed as he hadn't been able to see his best friend in 2 years, but if he was asked of something by the head monk he could hardly refuse, plus he was sure he would get time with Naruto later. I have actually only recently come to know Naruto. The young monk looked around at the one he had come to know was called Haku. Normally Sora wouldn't think of himself as petty, but when he saw another guy around Naruto he became weary. Sora had a rather isolated childhood due to what he had possessed, much like Naruto himself, and the thought of his best friend forgetting about him worried him far more than he would ever admit. He allowed me to accompany him after I lost somebody very precious to me. Sora felt a little bit of the tension drain away at that. Now that did sound like Naruto. The blonde was sometimes too caring and compassionate for his own good. What about you? Sora was still a little unnerved by the quiet girl that trailed behind them slightly. She hadn't said barely a word since entering the temple with Naruto, and so far the only interaction between them had been her holding a kunai to his tea. From what he had seen so far she seemed like a shinobi, both of them did in fact, hardly the people he would have expected Naruto to befriend. However, he trusted his friend's judgment. Naruto just had the ability to see and bring out the good in almost anybody he met given enough time. Naruto rescued me. Sora paused, expecting more. When it didn't, he just smiled awkwardly and started walking again, occasionally pointing out something worth viewing in the temple. Fu just continued to walk along in silence. She had considered telling Sora about the fact she was a Jinchuriki. She knew about his previous situation from Naruto after all. However, she still didn't feel comfortable with it. She was getting better at opening up to people, but she just couldn't befriend people the way Naruto could. Her trust was more difficult to obtain. Right now only 6 or 7 people in the world outside of her village knew that she was a Jinchuriki: Naruto, Haku, Tsunade, Shizune, Kiribi and Roshi, Han too if he was still alive. She listened absently to Sora comment on various things in the temple, but her mind was elsewhere. She was worried about Naruto, or more specifically she was worried about what was going to happen between them. Would Naruto now stay in the temple? Would this be where their paths parted? Fu sincerely hoped that wasn't true. Your story fills me with happiness and sadness at the same time, Naruto. The young blonde and the much more elderly head monk were sat in his study. Naruto had finished recounting his story to the man and he had simply sat there in silence, taking it all in, before now. When I allowed you to walk out of those gates and back into the world again, I knew your travels would be eventful. However, I had never expected anything like this. Naruto just nodded slowly. He had been the one to live it, but to recount his own travels, even he had to admit his story was somewhat fantastical. He had left nothing out. If there was anybody he felt he could trust unconditionally, it was Chukaku. It warms my heart to see you with such strong, dependable friends and to know you have touched the lives of so many. A kindly smile spread across his wrinkled features before it slipped away as some of the darker moments from Naruto's tale entered his thoughts. And again it fills it with dread knowing what you have had to go through even in your short life. Truly he believed that nobody Naruto's age should have ever had to face the things the young Rinnegan wielder had. It's okay. Naruto's voice carried none of the usually confidence he showed to others. Now that he was back home, he felt no need to maintain that strong outer appearance he had been bearing for so long. If anything, his voice finally started to betray the sheer exhaustion he felt from it all. As powerful as he was still only 13 years old. I've had time to come to terms with it all, even Shizuku's death. Shukaku nearly winced at that. He had felt the sheer emotion in the boy's voice when he spoke of the young girl he had found, befriended, loved and lost in the span of a year. Still, an enormous burden was placed upon your shoulders when you activated those eyes of yours. His smile returned and became as encouraging as he could manage. No matter what changed, he would always remember that little half-starved boy that had wound up on the doorstep with nothing but the clothes on his back and an inquisitive mind. I'm proud about the things you've accomplished, Naruto. His smile became a little more mischievous, more the way Naruto actually remembered the old man. Maybe later you could give me a little demonstration of your newfound abilities. Sora often speaks of when you would return so the two of you could spar. A smile of his own appeared on the blonde's face at that. It seemed Sora hadn't changed all that much in his time away. Now Naruto, if I may ask, the younger monk looked up, noting some of the playfulness had left the elderly man's voice as concern entered his eyes. It didn't seem like you felt your journey was over yet. What made you return to us so soon? Upon Naruto raising an eyebrow, the man coughed before elaborating. Not that I'm not pleased to have you back, you know. Naruto just chuckled. He was glad for that. Some of the stress he had been feeling just seemed to melt away the more he talked with his shushu. Honestly, I was talked into it. Shukaku raised an amused eyebrow before Naruto continued. But I did feel homesick. I just needed a little push to admit it to myself. The blonde sighed as he looked up at the ceiling of the study. But now that I'm actually here, I have to admit that there's something I need help with. Shukaku raised another furry eyebrow, however this time in intrigue. The problems Naruto brought to him were often the most interesting. Do tell. Fu seriously found her interest waning as the tour wound to a close. She had learned a lot about where Naruto had lived for a large part of his life, but when it came down to it, it was a temple. It was a very large and prestigious temple with more monks than many smaller villages had people, but it was still a temple. She had stayed at quite a few traveling with Naruto, and once you had seen one you really understood them all. There were places of mediation and training, places to eat and places to sleep, and that was basically it. However, her interest peaked again when they rounded a corner into a large, serene-looking field near the center of the compound. The group spotted Naruto and Shukaku sitting out on the grass, near to a statue of what appeared to be a monk in meditation. As they walked closer, Fu actually found her attention drifting to the statue. The detail on it was absolutely remarkable. It was as if somebody had simply captured a moment in time and frozen it in stone. However, she quickly forgot about it at the croaky sound of Shukaku's voice. Are you here? I wondered how long we would have to wait for you to join us. Sora lifted an arm up to scratch the back of his head with a sheepish smile, chuckling slightly. Sorry Shushu, I guess the time got away from me. The elderly monk waved the boy off as he beckoned for the group to join him on the grass. No matter, I was just about to begin explaining things to young Naruto here. Fu took the opportunity to sit next to her blonde friend, Sora quickly taking the other side before Haku had the chance. The ice wielder was perfectly fine with sitting next to the more elderly monk though. After all, he was still new to the group. What were you explaining? Sora actually blinked in shock as Fu spoke up. That was more than she had said with him, and she hadn't even been prompted to speak. Naruto asked me about something that at the time he left, still confused even me. He motioned to the dark-haired monk absently. Sora already knows this, but has Naruto ever explained to you what exactly he sees through those remarkable eyes of his? Fu nodded slowly. She had a vague idea, but the concept itself was hard to wrap her head around, actually seeing chakra in all its colors and forms. It just sounded fantastical, not that she didn't believe him. Haku on the other hand had no idea other than he could somehow see chakra and shook his head in the negative. Well, Naruto-kun can actually glimpse at what others could only dream of knowing about, the very appearance and nature of chakra itself. Haku's eyes widened just slightly at that. He hadn't realized the ability was so extensive. However, near to when he first joined us at the temple, he observed a strange, translucent glow to everything that he could neither feel nor could his preta path interact with, which at first led me to believe it was not in fact chakra. At this, even Naruto started to avidly pay attention. This was partly why he had come after all. However, after Naruto left on his pilgrimage, I became curious once more and began looking through our archives. He gave a small smile to Naruto, knowing that the blonde had tried the same. However, there were things he just couldn't access at that age. I believe that what Naruto was viewing was nature chakra. At that, all four teens blinked in confusion, never having heard the term before, at least not in any more than passing. Nature chakra. As in chakra that doesn't come from humans. Chukaku's eyes twinkled slightly as he saw some of that original inquisitive nature of Naruto's shine through with his question. Actually, as far as I can tell, it does come from humans, however it also comes from everything else. Plants, animals, even the ground itself contribute to the nature chakra that permeates our world. It's the chakra of the world itself. For the most part it goes unnoticed, however there are those that know of its existence and even are able to interact with it. He paused a moment to allow that to sink in, also because he had a bit of a dramatic flair and he enjoyed the tension in the air. Those select few are known as sages. At that, all of the teens were shocked, however none more so than Naruto, whose rippled eyes opened wide in realization, something the elderly monk didn't miss. That's right, Naruto, the sage of the six paths was also able to manipulate nature chakra. It's no wonder either if he had the ability to see it like you can. Naruto nodded concedingly at that, wondering if, given enough time, he would have discovered this for himself. So how is it done, manipulating nature chakra? Chukaku smiled at Naruto sadly as his gaze drifted to the statue of the monk, bringing their own gazes with him. I'm afraid that knowledge was lost to us with Monk Gyatso. He was the last of us to ever attempt to harness nature chakra according to the records. Naruto gazed at the statue a moment, marveling at the amazing likeness it portrayed. The detail really was exquisite. What happened to him? Chukaku's smile twinged down even further at that, his eyes never leaving the statue, as if for the first time he was truly seeing it. Nothing, he's sitting right in front of you. After a moment of pause to allow that to sink in fully, all four teens visibly recoiled from the statue in realization. That's him. But he's a statue. Chukaku's gaze became stern as he looked around, a look that didn't often enter his features. Please Sora, respect. The darker-haired monk became quiet at that as Chukaku looked around again, finding Naruto alternating between him and the statue with a questioning glance. Nature chakra, it seems, is a double-edged blade. On one hand, the sages of legend and even those of today were renowned for their enormous strength and power. On the other, the training itself is dangerous and oftentimes lethal. Naruto's questioning look became a frown as he continued to stare at the statue, as if scrutinizing every inch. The sages of today. Naruto looked up in surprise at Fuu's voice, picking out a detail he had missed. Chukaku simply nodded. Oh yes, while a rare and powerful ability, there are still those that practice senjutsu. However, the ability is a closely guarded secret, mostly passed down from certain summoning animals to their contract holders. The only thing I know about the practice is that it involves being still. Naruto blinked slowly as he finally tore his gaze from the petrified monk, forever frozen in the picture of serenity. He remembered this statue. He had walked past it day in and day out for 4 years without thinking anything of it, and all this time it had once been a living, breathing human. How is that any different from the meditation we do? I remember being still for 3 days straight to win a bet with Sora. Chukaku gained a bit of mirth in his eyes as he too recollected that particular event. It had actually snowed on one of the days, but Naruto never once moved. No, my boy, what I'm talking about here is being truly still, perfectly in balance with nature and your surroundings. He sighed a moment, for a brief moment actually showing his many years he kept hidden behind a youthful, mischievous veil. However, Naruto became confused. He was unsure how he could possibly be any stiller than he was during meditation. Aren't there any faster ways? Once again Chukaku gazed at Sora sternly. Without Naruto around to siphon off some of his excess energy, he had become quite outspoken over the past years. There are no shortcuts on the paths to enlightenment, Sora. Quote. However, that stern gaze melted away as he looked up at the sky thoughtfully for a moment. However, now you mention it, from the limited information in the archives, it would seem that this training becomes easier in places with strong connections to nature such as Myobokuzen, Ryuchi Cave and Shikotsu Forest. Fu frowned at that. She prided herself on knowing most of the elemental nations off by heart, however she had never heard of those places. Don't fret, girl. She looked up to see Chukaku smiling at her kindly. I would not expect you to have heard of the summoning realms for Konoha's 3 great summoning contracts. Fuu's eyes widened in understanding, but she said nothing. Without a contract, those places were completely inaccessible anyway, or at least extremely well hidden. But then what is the problem? All eyes turned back to Naruto as he gestured around him to the temple, or more specifically the forest beyond. How much deeper in nature would we be in the forests of Hai no Kuni? For emphasis he lightly gestured to the petrified monk statue. If Gyatso could do it here, then theoretically it was suitable, even if he failed for whatever reason. Chukaku on the other hand simply shook his head slowly. I'm afraid that while once these forests might have been perfect for sage training, that is no longer the case. These forests around us are a result of Hashirama Senju's powerful Mokuton abilities, they are not natural at all. Gyatso predates even those times, back to the Warring Clans period. Whatever conditions existed then are vastly different than today, they are no longer suitable. Naruto's face fell slightly at the news, however he did not allow himself to be disheartened. Then I will have to find somewhere that is. Chukaku grinned at the steely confidence radiating from the young blonde. He truly was an indomitable spirit. I'm sure you will, boy, but now you must be weary from your travels. You and your friends are more than welcome to stay with us for as long as you require. Naruto's face softened into a light smile as he inclined his head at the older monk. Thank you, Shushu, I'm grateful. Chukaku just waved him up as the blonde stood. He was feeling tired now and some rest would be appreciated. As Sora lead him, Fu and Haku away, Chukaku watched them leave with a small sigh. You are truly destined for great things, Naruto Uzumaki. This temple won't constrain you forever. I just ask that you humor an old man in his twilight hours. With that the old monk stood, groaning at his creaking limbs. He wondered how Sarutobi could possibly be so old and still be a shinobi. The full moon hung low in the sky as Naruto made his way up to the roof where he knew he would find Sora. Sure enough, the boy was sitting there on the tiles, staring up at the bright white orb suspended in the sky as they used to do before Naruto left. He looked around when Naruto's feet made a soft whisper against the tiles but said nothing, returning his steady gaze to the sky as Naruto walked over and sat beside his longtime friend. So you're really leaving again, so soon? It had been 2 weeks since Naruto, Haku, and Fu had arrived at the fire temple, enough time for them to fully recuperate and enjoy a brief moment of peace before moving on. Naruto had decided that they would leave tomorrow, starting on what many would consider a pointless and vain quest to discover the secrets of nature, chakra and senjutsu. Yeah. Silence hung in the air between the two friends as Naruto joined Sora in turning his gaze up to the sky. We did this the last time I left too, didn't we? Just sit up here all night. A faint nostalgic smile appeared on Sora's face at that as he leant back on his elbows. Yeah, back then I had no idea when you would be back either. I kept asking myself if I could go along with you, join you on whatever it was you were going to do. He sighed, dropping his gaze from the sky as Naruto turned to look at him. Why didn't you? Sora gave a half-hearted smile, but he could tell Naruto's question was sincere. The blonde would have loved to have Sora join him traveling. However, at the same time, who was to say things would have happened the same way? Would he have still met Shizuku? Fu? Haku? Would he have gathered the Biju or made as much headway with the Kyuubi as he had? He didn't know. I'm not as powerful as you, Naruto, we both know that. His voice didn't sound all that sad about it, simply resigned. He knew it too, as not too soon after Naruto had come back the two had sparred, properly this time and without Fuu's interference. Sora had really taken shadow clone training to heart in Naruto's time away, clocking away far more training than the 2 years should have allowed. However, even with the initial boost being a pseudo-Jinchuriki gave him and those countless hours training and the subsequent headaches that came with it, he just could find himself competing with the Rinnegan bearer. Sora panted lightly, standing at the center of a large crater in a forest clearing some ways out from the temple itself. When a full spar had been suggested, Chiraku had been very insistent that they do it somewhere the collateral damage, and there would be damage, would be minimized. He felt lucky. Had he not been a pseudo-Jinchuriki and gained the immense stamina and chakra reserves that came with it, he was sure he would be completely out of it from chakra exhaustion. As it was, he only felt slightly winded, enough to debilitate but not to cripple. How are you feeling? The same apparently couldn't be said for his opponent. Naruto stood across from him, apparently completely unscathed or tired in the least. Sora growled lightly, a habit he had never quite gotten rid of in his fighting, and simply rushed forward. While he knew there was no condescension in his friend's voice, it still infuriated him that after all this time, after all his training, he still couldn't hold a candle to Naruto. Jua Repu Sho. He felt his chakra flood his right arm as he converted its nature to wind, carefully controlling the dangerous and violent element. It took form in front of him as a great, demonic claw of pure wind that wreathed about as if it had a mind of his own. Then, with an enormous grunt of effort, he sent the giant, lethal claw flying forwards, directly at his blonde friend. However, much to his consternation, he saw that Naruto wasn't making an effort to dodge, or block, or do anything. Come on, Sora, haven't you learned by now? Naruto raised a hand and Sora watched hopelessly as one of his most powerful wind attacks dwindled away to a harmless gust of air that was just as quickly snuffed out. He sighed as his body slumped back, finally starting to feel the dent all of this was putting on his reserves. He knew of his friend's predator path, however he had hoped that his jutsu was powerful enough to at least cause a few scratches even if it ultimately was absorbed. However, he couldn't continue with this. With every jutsu he launched, Naruto's own chakra supply only grew off of his own. It's not over yet, Naruto. As if to affirm his point, 10 different Soras suddenly sprung from the shadows the trees provided. The darker-haired monk shrugged of the fact his blonde opponent didn't seem the least bit surprised and joined his shadow clones as each donned 2 wicked-looking gauntlets of wind, taking on the same demonic visage as the last jutsu. Jua Sho Renden. Naruto observed quietly as the many different Soras approached him on all sides at incredible speed. It's still not enough. Naruto couldn't allow Sora to get close to him. The darker-haired monk had already proven his taijutsu was something to be feared. Like Naruto, he used his wind element to augment his movements. However, instead of blasting it out of his tenketsu for increased speed, he carefully manipulated the air around him to drastically lower the air resistance on his body, giving him incredible maneuverability. Naruto couldn't allow him to get close, so he did the one thing that came perfectly naturally to him, raising his hands up in a way that Sora instantly recognized. Shinra Tensei. However, Naruto could help but show his shock as instead of being blasted back by the technique, the Sora clone sailed through the chakra pulse as if it had never happened. You think I've just been doing nothing all these years, Naruto? Naruto had time to widen his eyes imperceptibly as he jumped back from the first clone, almost instinctively slipping into Mizu no Mai to dodge. He had found out the hard way that using his K's no Mai only added fuel to Sora's techniques and his Kaminari no Mai had the elemental disadvantage. He refused to use his High no Mai though, that was only for use against opponents and was his only truly lethal taijutsu form. However, as good as he was at dodging with this style, Sora just proved to be faster, obviously not having wasted his 2 years to prepare for this. Naruto was driven back by the barrage of clones and the dangerous wind jutsu, occasionally managing to grab one to drain it of chakra, however another would just take its place. Finally he had enough as his hand clenched, a large wave of sand exploding from the ground and instantly capturing all of the clones with only the original Sora jumping back in time. That was a nice try, Sora, but it's still not enough. Strangely though, Sora's grin didn't deteriorate in the least, putting Naruto rightfully on edge. It's not over yet, Naruto. The blonde's eyes widened again as 4 more clones sprung from the earth around him, hidden from his sensing technique by hiding underground. However, they didn't attack, and before Naruto could even do anything they ran through a complicated chain of hand signs in perfect unison befitting of clones. Finally they s their hands down, allowing long and even more complicated strings of kanji to unfurl from their palms to surround Naruto in a perfect square, crying out in perfect synchronization. Fuinjutsu, Shishiinjin. Instantly the kanji glowed a dangerous red as 4 walls of bright red flame sprang up, quickly enclosing Naruto as a roof formed over the barrier jutsu as well. A small smirk crossed his lips briefly as he recognized it as a seemingly more powerful version of the one Orochimaru had used to try and seal in the Kazekijin Hokage. This is very impressive, Sora. I hadn't realized you had advanced so far in Fuinjutsu. Sora smiled from outside of the barrier. It was clear enough for them to see each other through the flickers of the chakra-controlled flames. You have no idea, Naruto. The blonde just nodded, inwardly both proud and impressed of how much Sora had advanced. How did you nullify my Shinra Tensei? Naruto was genuinely curious about that. It had been the first ability he had developed from his Rinnegan, so naturally Sora knew of it and had come up with ways to best it in the past, but nothing like this. At that Sora grinned proudly. That was one of his proudest achievements. Naruto's Deva path had always been the deciding factor in their spars 2.5 years ago, even after the Preta path manifested. I took a gravity seal and modified it so that it reacts to changes in pressure on my body, adjusting accordingly. If the gravity on my body changes, it activates, resetting it to what it should be. It doesn't matter the direction or the power behind it. Naruto had to let out a small smile at that. It really was ingenious. In that way the monk had managed to completely nullify his Deva path, although the claims about it being able to handle any amount of power remained to be seen. You really have come a long way. Sora's grin slipped into a frown as Naruto walked forward, passing through his barrier as if it was no more troublesome than normal air. He groaned, sinking to a knee as the chakra exhaustion finally caught up to him. That barrier had been his trump card. He didn't have anything else, at least nothing he could use to beat Naruto anymore. He blinked though when a hand on his shoulder steadied him, bringing him back to his feet. I'm still behind you. He said it under his breath, barely a whisper. Naruto picked it up anyway. He didn't say anything though, just smiling lightly as the two friends walked back towards the temple. And what about now? Sora looked around at Naruto as the blonde looked at him questioningly, his violet eyes carefully gauging his friend. Do you want to come with me? Sora blinked at that before looking away, staring at the tiles in front of him as if they would suddenly unfurl and reveal the answer to him. However, no such miracle took place and he was left to sort out his own thoughts into an answer. Did he want to go with Naruto? Of course he wanted to go with his friend, the first boy that had looked past the demon inside of him and befriend him. He loved Naruto like a brother, but looking at him now, older, wiser, more powerful than ever before, he sighed. Naruto had his own life, he had new friends. Even if he said Sora would always be his first, he knew it was still true. If Sora went with his friend, he knew he would be happy, content even. However, Sora didn't want to just be content, he didn't want to forever trail in the great shadow Naruto cast, as selfish as that seemed. No. Naruto's face fell a little. He understood Sora's choice, but that didn't make him any less upset about it. I couldn't do that to myself. Naruto looked back up, a little surprised to see the slight grin pulling at Sora's lips as the boy gazed up at the moon. You're strong, Naruto, way stronger than I am, and you probably always will be. He looked around, capturing Naruto in an oddly powerful gaze, the steel in his eyes practically radiating out from him. I want what you have, a life outside these walls of my own. If I went with you, I would just drag you down, hold you back. Before Naruto could protest that, Sora held up a hand, silencing him for the moment as his gaze softened. It doesn't matter if you don't agree, I know it and that's enough. He stood up on the roof, gazing out at the temple that had been his life, practically his whole world for the first 13 years of his life. I'm always going to be grateful you were my friend and that you were there so that I could better myself with you as the unattainable goal. He grinned as Naruto stood up as well, a little more hesitantly though as he gazed curiously at his friend. So when you go tomorrow, I'll be following you out of those gates, but I'll be going my own direction. I think it's time for me to find something new. He stopped, pausing to see Naruto's reaction. However, instead of the protests he had expected, or even the denial of some of his points, he only found Naruto to be smiling slightly sadly. You're still just as hot-headed as ever, you know that, right? Sora just grinned enthusiastically, the feeling becoming infections as a warmer smile tugged at the blonde's features. I hope you find what you're looking for, I really do. Sora nodded briefly in thanks for the sentiment, but his gaze became confused as Naruto clasped his hands together, one burning a vibrant red, the other a much colder blue. When he opened them again, a single white Magatama bead, exactly the same as his earring, lay in his hands. When Sora looked up questioningly, Naruto simply held the bead out and dropped it into the boy's palm. I figured I should return the favor, for good luck. Sora looked down at the innocuous little bead in his hand that moments ago had been nothing but the chakra running through Naruto's body. Finally, a warm smile encroached on his face as his hand tightened around the present. Thank you, Naruto. Naruto simply returned the gesture, patting the dark-haired monk on the back lightly. Whatever happens on my journey, or yours, we'll still be friends. Sora just gave a single affirmative nod before the two boys sat back down on the rooftop, content to simply look up at the moon, hanging sentinel in the sky above them. Once again, Naruto and his two companions found themselves wondering, almost aimlessly, through the expansive forests of Hai no Kuni. They had left the temple the previous day, Sora hot on their heels even if he had been headed in a different direction. Something told Naruto that he would see his first friend again. Their paths were irrevocably interwoven now. Sora hadn't really stated where he was planning on going, but Naruto could imagine him now, wandering cluelessly through the world, much like they were now. So where's our first stop? Naruto didn't look back at Fu as they continued walking, but the girl did quicken her pace slightly, so she strode along next to him. I haven't really decided yet. Fu nodded somewhat understandingly. Naruto had undertaken a massive task in trying to unravel the intricacies of senjutsu without any kind of help. It was understandable that finding a starting point for such a quest, for lack of a better word, would be difficult. We should focus on areas with large expanses of forestry. Naruto nodded to that as Haku joined them by taking up Naruto's other side. As nervous as the boy had been coming into a place that was obviously so important to Naruto, he had felt as though he really learned something about the blonde Jinchuriki, feeling more like a part of the group as a result. It would seem places like Kusa no Kuni, Tani no Kuni, Kawa no Kuni and Cha no Kuni would be the best places to start. Again Naruto nodded as Fu offered another insight. He had been thinking much the same. However, Tani no Kuni was out of the question. He wouldn't put Fu in danger by bringing her so close to her previous home again. However, Kusa no Kuni definitely seemed like a good place to start. After all, he had passed through there once before and there was a vast amount of strange and exotic forestry as well as wildlife to constitute nature chakra. I think we should start in Kusa no Kuni. He paused a moment, not breaking his stride, as he waited for any kind of argument from his friends. When it didn't come, he smiled. He genuinely enjoyed having people around him that trusted his judgment like this and were willing to follow his lead because of the trust they had in him. In that vein, he subtly altered the path they were walking in until they were headed northwest. They were in the eastern region of Hai no Kuni and their path would take him up and north of Konoha. They didn't need another encounter with Leaf Shinobi so soon. However, after a few hours of walking interspersed with the occasional light conversation, Naruto's normally serene features pulled down into a half frown as his gaze kept pulling off to their left. It was just outside the range of his sensory vision, but he could still notice it, the copious amounts of chakra being thrown around. From the way Fu kept shooting discreet looks in the same direction, she had noticed it too, as did Haku. Should we ignore it? It's most likely a battle between shinobi. Naruto frowned. That was exactly the problem. Shinobi battles were messy and they often left either casualties or opponents with terrible injuries. His preservation instincts were screaming for him to ignore it and carry on. This deep in Hai no Kuni territory, one of the sides was likely to be Konoha. However, the part of him that was a medic, practically beaten into him by Tsunade, screamed equally loud that he had a responsibility to make sure that any injured parties received the appropriate care. No, we'll go and at least see what's happening. He didn't get any protests from the two, but Fu's eyes narrowed slightly at that. She cared little for the conflicts of shinobi, and with the ingrained K instincts from her previous life, it was a whole lot easier for her to ignore her conscience and those same instincts driving Naruto to go and help. However, she would wordlessly follow Naruto because that was the path she had chosen. She was committed to that. It didn't take them all that long to reach the first signs of battle, although worryingly they seemed to stretch in an almost straight line from the north heading towards Konoha. If they lingered for too long, either those responsible or the team Konoha would undoubtedly send would find them. However, in that time the fighting had obviously stopped, only the lingering chakra in the air indicating there had been conflict at all, that, and the enormous forest of bones the trio came across. Naruto had never seen anything quite like it. Enormous spires of pure white bone rose from the earth like the twisted garden of a demon or like the impossibly intricate ribcage of an unfathomable giant. It was impenetrable. If there was a way to navigate the odd and imposing structure, Naruto couldn't see it. The stranger aspect was the fact the bones were practically saturated in chakra, and that meant a shinobi had done this. However, it must have been some form of last stand, as no self-respecting shinobi would leave this kind of evidence behind of their fighting style. A Kaguya. Naruto tore his gaze away from the unique sight to see Fu analyzing it with a cold, calculating gaze that slowly roamed over the towers of bone. A clan thought extinct before even the bloodline rebellions that in some unique cases could manipulate their bone structure as a powerful defense or lethal offense. She had only known about the Lost Clan as they had played such a massive role in the initial stages of the rebellions, and their power, or at least that of those who carried their Kekkei Genkai, the Shikotsumyaku, was legendary. So this was Kirigakure. That didn't sound right. He knew for a fact Kiri was still deeply embroiled in rebuilding their shattered and divided country. They would never launch an attack like this against Konoha. No, if Kirigakure knew they had a Kaguya, one with the Kekkei Genkai no less, they would never risk him before he could restore the clan. In a way it was very sad. This large field of bones marked the end of quite possibly the most powerful clan in Mizu no Kuni, bar perhaps the Huzuki. Based on the direction the battles seemed to have gone, he most likely was fleeing to the north, to Ta no Kuni. Naruto narrowed his eyes at that, Otogakure, which meant Orochimaru had a hand in this. We should move on, see if there are survivors elsewhere. Naruto could sense nothing but the ambient chakra of the bone field here. There were no survivors. Leveling the bones to actually check would only alert anybody nearby, and the bones themselves were non-navigable. The trio quickly moved south, hurrying so they could at least get in and out before Konoha recovery teams could move in. Naruto knew that such a team would lack a medic as good as either him or Fu, and in the case of enemy shinobi would be more interested in interrogation than healing. Finally the dense forest broke for them as they emerged out into a vast swathe of forest that appeared as though it had been completely leveled. Entire trees had been bisected to fall to the forest floor. The sea were clean and fast, indicating a wind jutsu. However, none of that really interested Naruto compared to the weak and fading chakra signature he felt from somewhere in the middle of the new clearing. He rushed forward, Haku and Fu right on his heels, until he found what he was looking for. A single Kunoiki was trapped underneath a massive trunk that was currently lying across her legs, no doubt crushing them from the extreme force if it hadn't already. This was particularly bad. Crush injuries were very tricky to deal with and had a certain time limit before the limb affected become unrecoverable. However, a very quick diagnostic jutsu told him that they weren't too late, so the blonde wasted no time circulating chakra through his arms, legs and back as he used what little of Tsunde's enormous strength he could to heft the massive tree off of the girl. She was unconscious, which was good, otherwise she would be screaming in agony right now. He didn't have to be a medic to know that her legs were a serious mess. They were crushed in multiple places and her right kneecap was completely shattered from the awkward position her leg now lay in. What was worse was that at the very edges of his sensory range he felt Shaka's signatures heading towards this position, rather quickly. Fu, help me here, we need to get her somewhere safe and fast. People are coming. The mint-haired girl nodded, having made a similar assessment to the blonde. Haku stood there a moment, feeling rather helpless in the situation. He was used to dealing with minor, trivial wounds that Zabuza would get, nothing on this magnitude. He had been reading up on techniques and practices, but reading and doing were two very different things. However, there was one way he could help. Genjutsu was not his forte despite his impressive chakra control, but he could cast one that would buy them time to get away at least, confusing the approaching party. When the Konoha recovery team arrived minutes later, they found nothing but an empty clearing of down trees. It wouldn't be until later that they would break the genjutsu. By then it was too late. Tayuya awoke. Well, that alone was enough to surprise her, especially after that Tsunabe had practically brought the entire forest down on top of her. Her mind was hazy and she couldn't think straight, but she knew she was alive. The gentle but irritating throb from her legs told her that much. Attempting to lift up her body proved useless. Obviously, whatever was keeping her from feeling the pain in her legs was also keeping her muscles relaxed and unresponsive. However, her struggles didn't go unnoticed for too long as a soft, but undoubtedly male voice called out. You shouldn't try to move just yet. Your legs need to stay elevated above your heart, and right now that's slightly precarious. Tayuya just about managed to lift her head long enough to see her legs, wrapped up in more bandages than she could count, were propped up against a very low branch of a tree. Her head flopped uselessly back down onto the soft sleeping mat she was lying on. From the smell of grass all around her and the clear sky above framed by tree canopies, she quickly worked out she was in a forest clearing. What the F going on? She had meant a lot more venom in that question that had come out. She almost cringed from how weak and pitiful she sounded. It's okay. We found you in the forest and brought you here to heal you. Tayuya scoffed at that, groaning as the action caused her to burst into a fit of coughs. Naruto just calmly waited for them to subside. The damage to her legs wasn't the only thing wrong with her. She had a few broken ribs and multiple lacerations around her body. Finally the redhead's coughing fit down and she laid her head back to stare up at the sky angrily. Oh yeah, you do that out of the good of your heart or something. This time Tayuya managed to push some spite into her words, however Naruto was unperturbed. From the condition she was found in, some hostility was to be expected. In a way, I suppose you could say that. Tayuya snorted again, but more carefully as to not irritate her obviously injured ex, probably also covered in bandages, although she didn't have the energy to check. She probably looked like a mummy right now. Great. So how did you end up underneath a tree? Tayuya glared at nothing again, lacking the will to lift her head up and actually look at the one talking to her. Off, I'm not telling you anything. Naruto absently shrugged. He had fulfilled his duties as a medic for the most part, everything else was just congenial, although he had to admit the girl was healing at an astounding rate, even for a Kunoichi. How about a name then? I'm Naruto. Tayuya just turned her head slightly and spat in a random direction, knowing she wouldn't have hit Naruto based on where his voice was. It's Tayuya, you better remember it, see, cause I'm the one that's gonna kick your scrawnier when I. Tayuya suddenly felt lightheaded as an odd warmth spread from somewhere around here, accompanied by a soft humming that she recognized from Kabuto as medical ninjutsu. Naruto just chuckled as Tayuya began to drift off, the medical ninjutsu he was using putting her to sleep so she wouldn't aggravate her own injuries. It seemed his latest patient had something of an anger issue. That would be fun. Tayuya's a nice name. The redhead couldn't even sneer as her world turned dark again. This time when Tayuya woke up she could instantly tell it was night. The sky was dark and it was considerably colder. Although there was a blanket thrown over her fending off the worst of it. She grinned as she realized her curse mark had done its thing, healing her body at a rate most other shinobi would be green with envy over. However, while she now found she could actually lift up her torso, her legs seemed to be an entirely different matter. They screamed out in pain as she lowered them to the ground, making her grit her teeth in agony as she placed one foot forward, followed by the next. That's really inadvisable. The voice made her freeze. She had been hazy and barely lucid, but she recognized it as the voice that had talked with her before. Naruto, if she recalled correctly. Turning, her eyes actually opened in moderate surprise when she found a young, blonde-haired boy, younger than her even, sitting on a log and watching her calmly with squinted eyes. Despite your rapid healing, the bones in your legs are very weak right now. They were fractured in many places and your right kneecap was completely shattered. I'd hate for you to undo the work me and Fu did repairing it. Tayuya just scowled at the monk, but it was weakened by the pain she was feeling. The F you want anyway? I don't know you and you definitely don't know me. She spat the words out, however Naruto seemed completely unfazed. Soon it could be far more vulgar than this when she was properly drunk. Actually, I do recognize you. You were part of the group sustaining the barrier technique around the Hokage and Kazekage. As he spoke, he opened his eyes and Tayuya had to catch herself from falling over in shock as a set of violet, rippled eyes met her own. In fact, she stumbled back, tripping over her own feet and crying out in pain as she fell back, expecting to feel the agonizing sting as she fell on her legs. However, instead she only found herself gently lowered to the ground. Naruto had moved faster than she could notice in her pained state and he gently lowered her to the ground. You're the that Orochimaru kept be about, the one with the F-up eyes like that Uchiha prick. Naruto just shot her an amused glance. Maybe she was worse than a drunken Tsunade, a frightening prospect. You have a rather colorful vocabulary. Tayuya snarled at him and tried to wrestle out of his grip, however it was useless when it only caused her injuries to burn with pain. F off. She started though when she realized just who it was she was cursing, the same boy that had driven off Orochimaru. He had seemed older back then though, maybe it was just the veritable tsunami of sand he had summoned and allowed to hover threateningly over their heads though. What do you want? This time she knew her voice sounded meek, because that was how she felt. It was like being near Orochimaru, knowing she was so absolutely and unquestionably outclassed, dwarfed by their power. Nothing really, although getting rid of that hideous mark on your N would be rather nice. I can see chakra and that thing is so tainted and twisted it hurts just to look at. Tayuya started at that, he really didn't want anything from her. Her eyes narrowed angrily. That wasn't possible, nobody was like that, not in the cruel, harsh world she had been raised in. What do you want with the curse mark? Naruto raised an eyebrow at that. Who in their right mind would allow something called a curse mark to be placed on their body? Like I said, I want to get rid of it, or at least the vile chakra inside of it. It really is unpleasant to be around. His danger senses kept going off every few seconds as his ability to sense through the water had him cringing at the evil chakra inside that seal. Yeah, well, good luck, it can't be removed. Naruto just raised an eyebrow and placed a hand on her right above the seal, making the girl flinch away from the contact. What the F are you doing, blondie? Naruto just stared at her blankly for a moment, pondering whether or not this was a good idea before shrugging nonchalantly. It's a seal, it needs chakra. With that simple explanation, Naruto began absorbing all the chakra he could from the seal, only to widen his eyes in shock. It was like the Gobi all over again. As soon as the vile chakra entered his system, his arm began to burn. It hurt so much he immediately began to vent the horrible chakra out from his other arm, directly into the ground. Tayuya could only watch in amazement as that familiar burning sensation that was a constant reminder of the curse mark slowly faded away. At the same time, an increasingly large circle of S-grass began to spread out from where Naruto pumped the B chakra into the earth. What the F was that? Tayuya was shocked as the last of the throbbing in her shoulder S down as Naruto finally let go of the ground, revealing a large circle around 4 meters wide of completely S-grass. Like I said, Naruto's breathing was slightly ragged from the experience. The chakra really was unpleasant. That chakra was vile. Just having it in your body like that was probably taking years off your lifespan. Not to mention whatever that substance was in the seal he had removed almost as soon as he had seen the thing, some kind of enzyme. Tayuya just stared at the patch of S-earth in shock for a moment before regaining her senses, narrowing her eyes as she shot a weary look at the blonde. Well, now what? What are you going to do to me? Naruto breathed in deeply as he allowed his breath to steady before standing up, making sure Tayuya could support herself first. Nothing. If you feel like you can walk, then you're free to go. As if to emphasize this, he walked back over to where he had been sitting before, a small log by a cozy-looking campfire. Not that Tayuya would ever call anything cozy. 2 other mats surrounded the fire, taken up by a mint-haired girl with caramel skin and a dark-haired boy that looked far too feminine. Tayuya noticed with a small amount of shock that she had been lying on Naruto's bed, probably for more than a few nights now. However, she set that aside as she stayed where she was, just staring at the blonde as he calmly gazed back. Just like that. You just let me go. Naruto just shrugged and Tayuya hesitated for only a moment before scrambling to her feet ungracefully and limping away from the camp as fast as she was able, which, embarrassingly, was pitifully slow. Naruto watched her leave with a small sigh. He would have hoped the Kunoichi would at least stay long enough for her injuries to fully heal, but in the end he wasn't going to hold somebody against their will, even if she could potentially provide information on Orochimaru. Tayuya couldn't help but sneer at her own pathetic situation. She was limping through a forest, no clue where she was and no idea where to go. She could never return to Orochimaru now, not after failing her mission like this. The Uchiha brat just had to go and refuse Orochimaru's invitation, stating that somebody who couldn't K the Hokage had no right to say they were strong enough to teach him, prick. That of course had resulted in the sound 4K the little bee, but not before their fight alerted practically the whole of Konoha. They had gotten out okay, but the recovery teams had been on them fast. However, she felt confident they would have been able to get away if those from Suna hadn't shown up as reinforcements. At this point she didn't even know if Kimimaro was successful in getting the Uchiha across the border to Tano Kuni. She winced again as another stumble brought her back to her present situation, making her stop against a nearby tree. Her breath came out in ragged gasps. Without the curse mark and whatever jutsu Naruto had been using to dull her pain, she felt every step like a knife into her legs. A lone tear trailed down her cheek from the pain, unable to hold it back any longer. She had no idea what to do anymore. As soon as Orochimaru worked out she was alive, and she was sure he would send somebody to deal with her. Loose ends weren't tolerated after all. However, her head perked up as she looked back in the direction she came from. That blonde kid was strong, really strong enough at least to provide her protection long enough for her to improve her skills enough to deal with whatever flunky Orochimaru sent her way. She couldn't imagine it though, debasing herself to, playing nice, just to eke out sympathy and protection from a kid 2 years her junior. Well, it was either her pride or her life in the end, and after another few moments of hesitation her decision was made. Kami F damn it. She was screaming to nobody, but it at least felt nice to vent before she turned around and trudged back the way she came. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.